But we are here today to attend the talk by Peter Beerel. So I give the floor to Professor Ney Calazans to present Peter Beerel. And then after the talk, Peter Beerel will answer the questions that you can do using the YouTube chat. So Ney, the floor is with you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hayes. So I'm here to conduct a little bit of the presentation of Professor Beerel. Just give you a little bit more of information than it's contained on the short CV. Peter Beerel has a doctoral degree from Stanford University, doctoral and master's degrees from Stanford University, all achieved in 1991 and 1994. And the bachelor's degrees in electrical engineering from Princeton University in 1989. He joined the Department of Electrical Engineering Systems at the University of Southern California, where he is right now, at Viterbi School of Engineering in 1994, and he's currently a full professor and associate chair of the Computer Engineering Division. He's also a research director at the USC Information Sciences Institute. And before that, Professor Dr. Beerel was the faculty director of innovation studies at the USC Stevens Institute for Innovation from 2006 to 2008. And in May 2008, he took a leave of absence from USC and co-founded the enterprise Timeless Design Automation with one of his previous PhD students, Georges Dimo. Their mission was to demonstrate and commercialize asynchronous ASIC flow for high-performance system. They were successful and sold the company in July 2010 to Fulcrum Microsystem, which was later acquired by Intel in 2011. Dr. Beerel was a recipient of the VSOE Outstanding Teaching Award in 1997 and the VSOE Junior Research Award in 1998. He received a National Science Foundation Career Award and a 1995 Zumberger Fellowship. His interests include a variety of topics on electronic design automation, VLSI, and machine learning. He and his students have won several Best Paper Awards, including at Async 99, Async 2014, and Async 2020. He was the 2008 recipient of the IEEE Region 6 Outstanding Engineering Award and is a senior member of the IEEE. Besides that, I must say that Peter is a very good friend. I've spent some time with him at Los Angeles, and he's a great guy. If you manage to become one of his students, you are fortunate to participate in the presentations and becoming a member of his research group, which is a very good research group and a very united one, having visiting Peter at home and having lots of barbecue and other stuff at his home where he's eager to receive you if you were a student of him. And besides, I consider him one of the most intelligent and performing researchers on asynchronous design and now machine learning and so many subjects that he knows about in his 175 more papers produced to now. So I'll leave you with Peter, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Ricardo. This has been very nice to see you both again. Nate, it's been a long time. I'm gonna that we've known each other now. It's over 10 years. I have a picture of us in 2015 in Bahia, the beginning. It's been a wonderful collaboration. Wonderful getting to know you, Brazil. I spent I think it's almost 3 months total. In the Porto Alegre area, beautiful area, and hope to visit again. Certainly, my wife is looking forward to going to Chips in the Jungle, so we will see what I can do in terms of submitting a paper. But today, yeah, my talk is on a relatively new area for me. I've been doing machine learning for about 5 years, and connected to my interest in hardware, particularly low power hardware. Our emphasis has been doing machine learning at the edge, where we still worry about energy efficiency. We worry about trustworthiness, that the models that we use, we can trust them, that they won't be easily attacked, and also, very importantly, privacy. So efficient, trustworthy, and private AI at the edge is the title of my talk. And I have to first thank, as Nay said, I've been blessed with a large number of great PhD students, and they helped me dive into machine learning and continue regularly publishing. 3 students that have graduated very recently on the top, now at Intel Labs, University of San Francisco and Amazon, Shobik, Dake, and Gorov, and 2 students, Yuk and Zayu, still with me now. So just to start, I think we understand the impressive progress of deep learning in many, many different tasks for autonomous driving, for classification of objects, for speech recognition. We've all seen the impressive, even for generative AI, ChatGPT, natural language processing. It is changing the world. And I believe, for the most part, can change the world for the better. There are plenty of devices that will leverage these things, and the underlying hardware will be, well, we're going to be continuing to use CPUs and GPUs, and then the explosion in terms of application-specific hardware for various machine learning models, ASICs for machine learning, will grow. And the number of business models, the number of new companies that will leverage this is going to explode. So this is going to be the new Moore's Law. And well, part of that and part of the issues that we're having and part of the fun in terms of the research is that the models, the machine learning models that are being developed, continue to grow almost at an exponential rate, whereas the hardware, because of the tail off of Moore's Law, is not. So we have increasing complexity of models that do amazing things, but our hardware is harder to keep up. So these can be done at the cost of more and more GPUs in large compute farms for the Amazons of the world. But this comes at a cost for energy, for our environment, and also means that we can't do some of those things on our phones, on our tablets, on our IoT devices, where we might want to keep our data, where we might want to keep our privacy. How do we do all that? So these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. So edge processing will grow 75% by 2025. This is killing our energy in terms of making it grow, and this is a problem. The model's not necessarily robust. We've heard of certain things, the Tesla models all have challenges. There are adversarial attacks that can affect all sorts of things, particularly for military applications. And then privacy. We would like to keep our data private, particularly if it's hospital-oriented or school-oriented or whatnot. And then the companies that are developing the models would actually like to keep the models private because they spent millions of dollars developing the models. So how do we get our data that we want to keep private to run on their models, which they want to keep private, and still be able to do things like inference? So our belief is that I come from a circuits background, and I come from a low power background. So we have to think about the hardware, the energy consumption as we think about the model. So it's a co-design for energy efficiency. The model, we co-design the model, co-design the model for robustness, make sure that it will be robust to attacks. You can't have, as the picture in the bottom here shows, little changes in the picture that could actually confuse the model and say, oh, that's not a stop sign. And then you have to worry about, again, the privacy aspects. How can you efficiently make it such that you can keep your data private from the companies that are trying to sell their models as a service? So all of these things, I think, have an interplay with them. It makes understanding not just the computer science of the models, but also the circuits that you guys may be more familiar with, really, really useful, right? because a lot of times the people who are just doing the model stuff in PyTorch don't understand the hardware at all. But as you do understand the hardware, there are a lot of opportunities to think about trade-offs. So the talk has these three parts. Let's talk on the first part, deep neural networks balancing pruning and robustness. So again, the robustness definition here is I want to have a situation where, let's say I have a stop sign, I'm classifying it that it clearly should be a stop sign. I don't want the option of an attacker learning about my model and then being able to perhaps put a little tape over different little bits of the stop sign and confuse the model to become a house. And shockingly, what people have shown that is it doesn't take a lot of perturbations to confuse many models because the models weren't designed to be robust. So the key is we don't want to just make sure that the model works on the simple clean stop sign. We need to make sure that it will also work on possible variations of the stop sign, some of them which might be adversarially presented. Others could be natural perturbations because of fog or rain or whatnot. And so you want to make sure your model is robust, particularly in these life-threatening autonomous driving, autonomous drones, robotics applications. And as he said, they can be naturally occurring or adversarially occurring. How do they do it? Well, basically, they do some sort of back propagation through the network to say, okay, what's the least change in input I can make that makes the largest change in output, that makes the classification change the most? And I just described two mathematical methods here, FGSM and PGD. And here's an example of it. You could have a panda and what looks like just a little bit of noise and then get a perturbed image, which to us looks still like a panda, but can fool a model in saying this is a given. The solution is to train with both the panda and the perturbed images, and then you get a more robust model. On the right here, what happens here, I showed the weights in the model. For the normal training, the weights can be, a lot of them can be 0 and centered around 0. When you have to do adversarial training, and you certainly want to, you have a situation where the value of the weights spread out. You get more non-zero and you get a more flat distribution of what the weight values are in the model. This makes pruning the model, making the model smaller by making more of the weight 0, more tricky. And whereas people have looked at how to prune models in the normal case, pruning in the context of an adversarial trained network is a little bit trickier, and some things that we worked on in particular. So there are techniques that have looked at adversarial robust model compression, robust pruning, and one of the things that's happened is that it really does slow down the training upwards of 9x. And some of them can't even guarantee a target pruning ratio. So this is a challenge. We came up with an approach in 2021, not too long ago, 2 years now, dynamic network rewiring, where essentially we looked at which layers can tolerate the most pruning. And then after we decide that through some special, okay, which layers are the most significant or most important from a point of view of the overall loss, to then, well, within a layer, which weights can be pruned most easily. And we have a bit of an algorithm here where we prune n edges and then we regrow them based on momentum within a loss function across epochs. So it's kind of iterative across epochs. We use some famous or some tricky dynamic regularizer to do this. But effectively, you can consider this all as part of changing the loss function and a few extra mathematics here, and guide this so that you can do it during training. And this not a bad idea. The landscape here in terms of where you can do model pruning, you got to decide what to prune. It could be a global decision, local, structured or unstructured. How to prune it, there have been early techniques that just get rid of the small valued weights, or look at the gradients, or other techniques. Look at, is it learned informationless? How often do you learn it? Do you try to do it iteratively? Do you do it one shot? Do you do it during training or post training? after training. That after training doesn't work quite as well. So our view and our technique, we looked at structured and unstructured techniques. We have gradient-based techniques that are done during training. They're learned, and as I said, they're during training in one shot, so they can be very fast. They don't require iterative training techniques, and that makes it, again, more energy efficient and socially aware training, I would say. Just to give you a sense of why channel pruning is important, if you first study machine learning, you realize, well, that if you're doing convolution, there's these famous 7 for loops that describe the operation of a convolutional layer here, going through all the rows, the columns, the different locations of the filters and all of the different filters. When you do structured pruning, you're able to take one of these for loops and reduce the upper bound of the for loop. And this is unlike, where it's all random, irregular pruning on the left. You're removing one channel, let's say, and not doing one channel. And it's a little bit more constrained, but from a point of view of coding, it's easy to see how you can save computation. And this ease of change makes it such that you can see the impact immediately on GPUs. So for irregular pruning, it's kind of hard to take advantage of it. There have been some ASICs that try to do this, and we'll talk more about that when you get to spiky neural networks. Structured pruning, easily handleable, can't quite get as much pruning, but easy to do on GPUs and see the benefit. So we supported both. And what's really surprising here is that, if you don't do pruning, your model is very redundant. There are a ton of weights that actually can be removed. You can see here the compression ratio here on the bottom here is a log scale, accuracy on the vertical scale, and it's very easy to get a factor of 10 reduction in channels, even more so in weights if you do a regular pruning without a large drop in accuracy. So now this is the clean accuracy drop, and here even now we see it for the adversarial accuracy as well. We don't see a huge drop in adversarial accuracy until we get much more significant pruning. Channel is, again, a little bit harder than irregular as we expect, and the results for CIFAR 10 and CIFAR 100 are pretty consistent. In the end, the model is done very well. We can yield aggressively compressed models, ones that, not just 10, 15%, but 50 to 90% less weights, which does save in terms of memory, which again, if you're a circuit person, you have to understand a lot of the energy consumption comes from memory, that you can certainly take advantage of here. So pretty interesting stuff, and something to keep aware of if you're getting into machine learning. Compression, pruning is going to be relevant. Understand the different techniques, understand the different angles that people are looking at. We, just as of maybe a couple of months ago, we checked, we were still ranked 1 in terms of the trade-off between accuracy and robustness. We're getting compression ratios of 20x here. So this is quite a large drop in terms of the number of model parameters that we need. And as I said, we're doing very well compared to others still. So that's the easy one, one that I want to highlight, because as you get into this domain, that's probably the first thing when people look at from a circuit spot. I want to hit on privacy as the second one. This is a really growing area of importance as the ubiquity of these machine learning models are growing. Basically, you have a situation now where for these large models, there are a lot of people who want to do machine learning inference as a service. So this would mean someone who builds a model, maybe it's a speech recognition model, maybe it's a natural language model. They want to put it in the cloud down here. So you have the model with the server in the cloud. You have your data here. Maybe it's images from your house, maybe it's healthcare information. You want to know if you have some disease or whatnot, and you want to run inference on these things. You want to leverage these models in terms of them, but you want to keep your data private, and it's completely natural and right that you want to keep it private. The server also doesn't necessarily want you to download their models because they spend so much money, as I said earlier, making them. So how do you do inference? So fortunately, a lot of very smart cryptographers have come up with different strategies. And one strategy that they've come up with is this called private inference, where they use so-called multi-party communication protocols to allow the client and server to interact in a way that the client can get the result of the inference without the server seeing their data, and vice versa. The server doesn't see it. So the client data is protected from the server model parameters are protected from the client, and neither can get each other, at least under the so-called semi-honest threat models, where they still have to follow the protocol. There's no side channels, which is still a big deal, and other aspects here, but this is a reasonable model to consider. So there are techniques, fairly complicated techniques, that involve homomorphic encryption. They involve secret sharing. They involve something called garbled circuits, which iterative and complicated encryption sequences. And there's both an online and an offline component. So the offline, which means we can ahead of time do this, is in the clouds. The online, meaning for every inference task, we'll need to run these online tasks. And then there's something called secret sharing for the linear stuff. That would be for the multiply accumulates. They're linear in this context. But if you're doing ReLU for CNNs or GALU or softmax for transformers, that has to be done a little bit more complicated using something like garbled circuits. So people have looked at it, and here is what happens. Compared to regular inference, the latency in terms of the microseconds can grow by 340x. So a huge penalty because of all the iterative encryption techniques that have to be done. The communication cost, now you're going to go back and forth between the server and the client to do this. That grows by 3,600. So really interesting that you can do it and you can protect the privacy, but the cost associated makes it the application areas that this makes sense small, which for me is good. And that means, oh, let's look at what the trade-offs here. Are there things we can do to improve this, right? Can we, for example, build a machine learning model which is cheaper to run in this private inference environment? And we originally started looking at CNN, and we'll talk about techniques to speed up those, as well as most recently looking at transformers, which have been taking over the world. As well as then protocol optimization, and we'll give you the first technique I'll talk about is a protocol optimization called split inference. We call that crypto clear. So a variety of different takes to do it, to improve this important area, and I'll give you a bit of an overview of all of them. So the first one is our crypto clear protocol. Again, as I said, for every layer in the network, there is going to be back and forth between the client and the server, crisscrossing, sending different encrypted information back and forth in a very intelligent way so that you can run inference. What we wanted to understand is, well, do you really need to do this encryption for all layers of the network? What we were wondering is maybe it's possible to just encrypt and do safely the first half of the network or so, and then for the rest of it, leave it in the server, okay? So if the rest of the network is only in the server, there's no chance that the client can get them, so that the service providers would be happy with that. The danger is now, though, that I have to give more information in the clear about my data. This intermediate activations now become available to the server folks, and can they reverse engineer from this intermediate activations to what I set? That would violate the privacy of my data if it were possible for them to reverse engineer the data. If in otherwise, we think that for the most part, at this point, somewhere deep down the network, the individual issues of your data have probably been abstracted away. And if they're abstracted away, they know, roughly speaking, that you sent was a dog or a cat, but they don't know any of the more details. Maybe that's okay, you are relatively protected. And if you do this, then obviously all this heavy crypto protocols will only be done on the first, say, half of the network, and thus reduce the cost of this entire thing by that amount. So we looked at different ways to do this. There have been both gradient descent and inverse networks that people have used to try to reverse engineer the input image. I describe a couple of different methods of doing this. There are inverse network attacks. There are variations of the inverse network attacks. And we certainly looked at one of them called DINA in our latest paper, and this was just in DAC 2023. And again, the thought process is even with these types of attacks, somewhere in the middle of the network, the attacks are unsuccessful, and that you can safely do the remaining layers in the clear. And here's just sort of an idea. There's a notion of SSIM, which is how similar is the attacker's guess of what your data is versus what it really is. And as you move down the layer, you move that boundary of what's encrypted and what isn't, the similarity of the resulting attack goes down, meaning it's relatively safe. Okay, so we've looked at this and we have a framework to build it, and we have an algorithm to find out where exactly that boundary should be. We have an idea of also adding noise to it. And what we found was that indeed, somewhere in the middle of the network, it's relatively safe to keep, to do the remainder of the network in the clear. Now, I will say there's some very new work that we have using generative AI techniques to do this reverse engineering, which may move these these boundary points to the right to some degree. Because generative AI is an extremely powerful way of possibly uncovering your input data. But in general, this philosophy is probably a smart one, where we have to make intelligent decisions of what should be encrypted and what is safe to send in an unencrypted fashion. And again, as engineers and not just purely computer scientists, this is the kind of thing that we want to look at. Our results showed that, with this technique and this attack, we can save a good amount, 1.71 and 1.82 times faster on different models respectively, save 2.5 or more than 2.5, 2.75 times the communications costs. Communication's still big, but we're saving it a good amount with this technique. Another technique that what we looked at was, we realized that, and I mentioned this earlier, that this ReLU layer, these are the nonlinear layers, they require very specialized, since it's nonlinear, specialized ways to do encryption, something called garbled circuits. They take up quite a large amount of the compute and communication costs. What we realized was, well, maybe you don't need every node in your network to have a ReLU. Maybe you can replace many of the ReLUs with identities. So what we did challenge the tack of optimizing the model to perhaps remove many ReLUs. We don't want to lose too much accuracy, but this will end up giving you a trade-off between PI latency and accuracy. This is, we can give a ReLU budget to this technique, and we were able to come up with a number of nice algorithms to do this. We figured out where the ReLUs can be removed. We had a notion of ReLU sensitivity, so that we only remove the ReLUs where the model accuracy will be the least penalized. Several papers, and again, loss model-based techniques on this. I don't need to go into all the details. I rather you understand just the high-level ideas. So here is there. So we had a top-level ReLU budget. We looked at model sensitivity to understand which layers needed the most ReLUs. We used a distillation-based top K attention differences. This is a distillation-based KO divergence loss technique. Distillation is a very powerful way to do things, to still, with a partial ReLU model, come up with the closest model you can get to where it was all ReLU. Then there was finally a fine-tuning technique here. So it was a 3-stage technique to find where we could remove the ReLUs most efficiently. And again, the results were very promising, and we could remove quite a large number of ReLUs and not get hit inaccuracy. We could also, at the same time, look at this as you start removing ReLUs. You could do it in a way that actually reduces the model size and makes the network even shallower, which would also help us with the number of linear layers. So we also looked at variations to do this, to make the model shallow again. This was in a CVPR workshop. And we can do some fairly nice things in this space here. All right, so I don't think I need to go into too much more detail here. I think you get the general idea. Now, as we move to transformers, everything relies, when you get to transformers, is these structures within the model that provide some notion of attention, that some notion of correlation between patches or features that seem to be a key reason why transformers do well. And there have been many, many forms of attention. The classic one that seems to have done the best is self-attention, with the famous QKV, and then there have been variants of them, and then there's an external attention here, which is the simplest form. And what we did is we looked at the complexity of these things here and the PI latency. And you can see here the self-attention, which gives us generally the most accurate transformer-based results, has the highest latency. This external attention, which has lower complexity, it has a softmax in it, versus, yeah, they both have softmax, is almost 3 times cheaper, but it also leads to an accuracy reduction. So there's, again, a trade-off here that we can play with. There's also a number of softmax approximations that people have done. The original softmax has an exponential. This is hard to do in private inference, as in other things. So people have started looking at polynomial time approximations for these things, and that becomes interesting. So again, the performance comparison of SA and EA, here's accuracy versus PI latency for self-attention, and it just vary the various forms of softmax. So it looks like various forms of softmax can be done, though this one's really bad. At least 2 ReLU and other things can be done. You drop the latency significantly here with only a small drop in accuracy. So we looked at this. We came up with another softmax approximation, learnable two quad here, where now we're learning some of the coefficients of this 2 quad technique. We also then intelligently use self-attention versus external attention through kind of a network search algorithm here. And we can do that at the head level. We can do it at the global level. We could do it at the element-wise level. So we could decide when to use the approximation, when to use self-attention, when to use external attention in a nice optimization strategy to find the best trade-off between accuracy and private inference. Our results are here, meaning we are getting with lower private inference latency, very high accuracy compared to someone. This is on CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100, and tiny image. And when you do this smartly, as we think we've done, we're doing very well in terms of the trade-off between PI latency and accuracy. Some of our latest work, well, again, we studied even more detail this self-attention and EA attention, and we noticed how much the inputs, how many softmax we actually have to do here. This is N cross N here. This is N cross S here, and we know the softmax in terms of this is the thing that's killing us in terms of private inference. So we added another linear layer, restructured this so that the number of softmax can actually be even further reduced. And hopefully with these extra linear layers, we can do it in a way without having too much an accuracy drop. So again, playing around with these different forms of self-attention to find a self-attention that's good accuracy and low latency, at least with respect to private inference. We also, again, looked at that's the GALU is another aspect here, or various nonlinearities, including, for the nonlinearities. Here is GALU. This is what's being used in vision transformers. It's another nonlinearity. We found that the leaky ReLU approximation is a good trade-off for that. So maybe we should, instead of using GALU in transformers, we should use leaky ReLUs. And again, what you see here, we're doing very well on the top left here, where our models are low latency, of the lowest compared to everything we've seen, and still fairly high accuracy here. So competitive classification accuracy, CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100, and ImageNet, um, and much lower latency. And so now, we are able to drop the latency, pretty, significant, where I think for a lot of real-time applications, it becomes very possible, very competitive to do. Okay, so my last part, and I'm not quite sure, I think I'm in 40 minutes, so I have like 10 more minutes, May, in talking. Are you there? I hope you're there, right?
You can go to 15 minutes more, 15 more minutes.
Okay, very good. So I will see how far I get then. There should be plenty of time. The last part of the talk I want to talk about is the spiky neural network alternative. So there has been a lot of interest in spiky neural networks. The idea is that our brain works off of not 8-bit numbers or 16-bit numbers, but off of electrical pulses. We can model an electric pulse as a binary spike. And so this hopefully could make a big difference. If we operate on binary spikes, that is essentially a conditional accumulate versus instead of a multiply accumulate. And there is a huge difference in cost between an accumulate and a multiplication. And so this is the thought process. Instead of doing multiply accumulates, and a lot of them in convolutional neural networks and transformers, can we move to the point where we're doing just accumulates and then comparing it to a threshold? Spiky neural networks also does that across time steps, where you're accumulating across multiple time steps. And again, if the accumulation is that much cheaper and you can keep the memory costs associated with this, it'd be nice. And so there's been a lot of work in this. And here is just to give you a sense of how much cheaper a 32-bit accumulate and add is compared to a multiply accumulate is. So it is dramatically cheaper. And this is where people said, maybe we should be spending a lot more energy on this. Traditionally, when people try to fully emulate the brain and emulate the way the brain learned, they weren't able to get very good accuracy. So the first tranche of research was, how can we get these supposedly really energy efficient spiky neural networks to also give us the same kind of accuracy that we're seeing with normal artificial deep neural networks? In the last 3-4 years, lots of research here have shown pretty darn good accuracy on ImageNet, on speech recognition things, Libri speech, and natural language processing. And more work is coming out every month on various spiky neural networks that are yielding very good accuracy. Some of them leverage the way we train artificial neural networks. Some of them are just smarter on how to train a spiky neural network from scratch. Both are possible. I would say, though, again, the measured performance benefits on neural network accelerators has still been a bit elusive, and I'll talk more about that. So if you want efficient and trustworthy spiky neural networks, there are a variety of ways to train them, and then there are a variety of different tasks that we can explore, that we can look at them. On the training side, I hinted at this already. Training from scratch, there's something called back propagation through time. It's similar to how we do ANN training, but we're recognizing the fact that we have multiple time steps. So a little bit more complicated to handle that. There's also train an artificial regular deep neural network and try to convert it into a spiky neural network that's efficient. Even we've done recent work in this area. Then there's hybrid approaches, where you start trying to train an artificial network and then fine tune it through back propagation through time. And there's a variety of techniques to improve that. And then there are online training techniques that are still very, very interesting, like STDP, I forget, stochastic time dependent plasticity, I believe that's what it's called. Techniques that may make a big difference in terms of facilitating online learning, which I think is sort of a next generation thing to think about. And on the task sides, you can run spiking neural networks for the class's image classification. You can do it for object detection, where you're dealing with static images, where you're dealing with video or speech. You can have other dynamic tasks to look at here. And both are interesting, particularly, I think, on the dynamic tasks. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So this is the SNN landscape. As you start reading stuff on spiking neural networks, you'll find most of your papers fit somewhere either in trying to improving training or demonstrating that they can do better in some of these different tasks, or coming up with a new spiking neural network model, such as a transformer-based spiking neural network, which is all the rage these days. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this space. I'll cover a variety of these things and give you a sense of what we do. So just to give a sense, a little bit of math here in terms of what a spiking neural network is. Remember, I said that you think of it is similar to a regular neural network where you have inputs, neurons feeding output neurons, though there's a notion of binary spikes rather than 8-bit or floating point value activations going in, and it's spread over different time steps. And then you still have weights to talk about how important a given input neuron is to a given output neuron is. You still have to consider them. But then the output of the neurons are themselves spikes at various time steps. So what happens internally here is that the neuron has so-called membrane potential, the UI here, and this is at time step T, and it gets updated with the weighted or with the weights here, and you add the weight if there's an associated spike on the input, and then there may also be, again, if you spike, then you will drop the threshold, and sometimes there's a leak term here. I believe that it is lambda here. Okay, so you see this membrane potential creeping up, and then if it exceeds the threshold here, you drop it back down, and then maybe the next time it creeps up, and then if it exceeds the threshold, you drop it back down. And each time it exceeds the threshold, you produce an output spike here. So here, when input spikes happen, this produces an output spike, and then you have further input spikes, and maybe there'll be a further output spike. Again, the beauty in some ways is that the hardware only deals with accumulates, no multiplies. But if you have too many time steps, too many adds, too much memory, this becomes a problem. So different training techniques that we've looked at, there's this ANN to SNN conversion, where we essentially train an artificial neural network and then copy the weights over to a spiking neural network. That works pretty well. There's surrogate gradient-based learning. We have to deal with the fact that the gradient on a spike, well, it's a spike, it's a Dirac function. So the gradient, you'd say, what is the derivative of that? It's undefined. So they have to come up with ways to mitigate that, something called a surrogate gradient aspect here. Fairly easily done. It's an approximation. It works fairly well. But there are, this is well understood. There are also techniques, and we've done this on model compression for the spiking neural networks here. We have used, again, this form of distillation that I mentioned before to create a sparse network here that still acts as if it wasn't sparse. And this allows you to deal with the so-called gradient explosion problem and produce very good sparse spiking neural networks. And again, the results can be very good. You can do it structured or unstructured, but you get a lot of reduction in spikes. And hopefully this reduction in spikes can, again, lead to lower energy dissipation, because most of the models that we have, the energy is highly correlated with the spikes. Less spikes, less energy. We also need to reduce the number of time steps, and that becomes a really critical thing. If you have 100 time steps, it doesn't matter that each accumulate and each time step is cheap. You have 100 times more of them, and you're going to get lost compared to an ANN. So methods to reduce the time step have become an extremely important way to go. We've looked at various ways to do that, to scale the activation type, to shift the activation function, to apply different regularizers on this. We have 3 different papers on this topic. You can do this well, and you can effectively reduce the time steps to on the order of less than 5, sometimes 2 is enough. So this is really important because, again, the number of time steps affects how many times you need to access the membrane potentials. You need to read, you need to them less, you need to write them less, you need to update them less. So time steps are a critical thing to think about when you think about memory energy, and we've seen that it improves compute energy dramatically. Here are some numbers here. You can do this and you can improve compute energy compared to a non-spiky model by 20x. Again, this is not memory energy, which can kill you, but compute energy, you are doing much, much better. And if you can keep it down to a very small number of time steps, even the memory energy associated with reading, writing will be okay and not hurt you. So we've done a number of different analyses here, and what we're finding is that even our training time is reduced, and we're seeing much better reduction, 19x reduction in training time. This means that, again, from an environment point of view, our techniques are also not killing the environment as we try to train these SNNs. As you look to more dynamic tasks, you want your models to have explicit state to remember the state of the preceding sequence of inputs. There are a variety of so-called recurrent neural networks to do this. One of the more earlier and famous ones is an LSTM. This has been done in the ANN world, and we figured out how best to do this in the spiking world. So we were one of the first to create a spiking LSTM model. We learned how to train it. We learned how to build it. We learned how to optimize it. We learned how to make it so that you, again, don't have multiplies, and that it's a very efficient architecture and data flow, again, coming from a circuits background. So this was just presented in ISLPED 2023, and you can definitely produce very efficient spiking LSTM architectures that now have a notion of state explicit in them. A little bit harder to train, I must say. This is an issue, but for some applications works very, very well. So here again, in terms of compute energy, we see huge improvements in energy, and accuracy is much better than RNNs and other LSTMs. Transformers can do better than this, but they come at a big cost. So there's been, transformers have taken over the world, but there are plenty of people, particularly who are interested at the edge, that recognize that maybe not everything should be done with a transformer because of its huge cost. That's where LSTMs and other techniques like this, there's something called an S4 model that's done very, very well in some natural language processing tasks that are very exciting to look at. Now that was all accuracy and energy efficiency, but if you're gonna think about doing spiking neural networks, don't forget you also worry about robustness. They are almost as susceptible, if not more susceptible, for adversarial attacks. So you need to worry about that. And we had one paper where we thought very carefully about the robustness models here, and we're able to say, well, okay, instead of sending the same input time step after time step after time step, if you had 5 time steps, you would send the same input 5 times. Maybe the right thing to do is to send the original image the first time step, and then for the next 4 time steps, noisy variants, so that the model inherently gets noisy, generalized versions of the input with no extra cost in training time. And this has worked very, very well. It improved robustness by 25%. Compared to the equivalent artificial neural network, and compared to 13.7 compared to other SNNs. So we were able to easily improve robustness, and this cost us nothing in training time, or very little if I recall. So I may have run fairly quickly through this, but I hope that just leaves more room for questions. So let me give you a summary and conclusions. So definitely we need to think about robustness. I drive a Tesla regularly. I would hope it'll get more robust than it is. We are seeing more and more of these models becoming in safety critical applications, and we need to think about model robustness. This is not just adversarial, this is natural perturbations, glare, fog, rain, snow. All of it needs to be thought through. You have to understand the environment that your model is going to be working on and make sure that it's robust to all of these different lighting conditions. And you can do it during training. This is achievable with relatively little cost. Privacy, as I said, really important. The problem is that the default ways to do it are just so costly that it's just not computationally practical to do it for real-time applications. But again, here's where co-design can play a role and largely unlooked at. So picking your model, picking your transformer, in particular your attention, picking the approximations for the tough stuff that's difficult, like exponentials, smartly training, creating approximations for which you can even optimize during training. All of these things are really important. And then there's a whole new realm here. Once you have these approximation models, we need to think about hardware acceleration for these things. So this is an area where we think there's a room here where it will definitely, again, filter back into my circuits roots, my CAD roots, my design roots. And I'm excited to jump into that space. We are already, heavily into the spiking neural networks. It's still an exciting area. There's the computational complexity remains the allure. The fact that we can do supervised training with low time steps, now less than 5, sometimes 2 or 1, really good. The fact that we can now do it for dynamic tasks where you have a stream of inputs, either in audio or natural language processing, really, really exciting. But we still need to worry about the hardware. And what we're seeing nowadays is it's not just the fact that you have adds versus multiplies, you got to count the number of memory accesses. If you're looking up the weights multiple times, this is a problem. So weight sharing is really, really important. There was a paper by Kaushik Roy's group at ISLPED this year, I believe, on data flow for spiking neural networks to minimize the cost of this. That's really important. And then also the cost of just doing the membrane potential lookups. If you have to do that multiple time steps and you have to do that for most of the membrane potentials, that could hurt you. So there may be ideas that we're working on to minimize that. So a ton of more research to be done in this space. Definitely when you're thinking about those trade-offs between accuracy and efficiency, and an exciting time for people who understand hardware and algorithms. And that is what I have for you today.
Thank you, Peter, for the wonderful talk. Maybe you can still share your images so that we can. We have time for a few questions here, but I don't see any questions in the comments so far. So I'll try to start and ask you in the first part of robustness as a primary objective. One major concern when we are dealing with privacy is side channel attacks. How do these models that you propose that can deal with adversarial training, for example, can deal against side channel attacks? I've been recently in a PhD thesis committee where the guy developed a neural network approach to improve attacks, side channel attack. How do they react then in the case of what the technique we propose here?
So this is a good question. All right, so there are a ton of hardware. I'm going to generalize it a little bit, Nay, right? Because it relates to both adversarial and privacy, the side channel attacks. So for the adversarial side of the fence, the side channel attacks can play multiple roles. But notice, maybe I need to, let me go back and make sure I can get the picture here. Right, so one aspect of the side channel attack is know that the attacker generally needs to take knowledge from the model. All right, so if you were able to protect the model, if the attacker didn't know what the model was, it becomes harder for the person to run an attack. the side channel information, you may think your model is protected, run, encrypted or run on hardware, but there could be power side channels, there could be optical side channels, there could be all sorts of side channels where the attacker can figure out what the model is, which just makes them easier to attack. Okay, so that's one aspect. The more we can protect the model, the less likely the attacker can be effective in adversarial attacks. So I think that's one answer. The other answer in terms of all of this side channel comes to the privacy angle here, and I may dive into that just so that you understand. So let's see if I can, maybe yes. So again, there are all this private inference has this so-called semi-honest threat model. So I'm going to send, or people have thought about sending their client data up to the server, maybe putting it in a so-called secure enclave. This is a cheaper way to do things. Intel has this SGX secure enclave, and they say, okay, this is protected. But there are plenty of side channel attacks on that secure enclave, in fact. So that means you think you sent your data in a situation where the number of people who can access your data on the server is quite small and protected, but no, another person who is co-located on that same GPU uses a side channel attack to actually read data from a so-called secure enclave and then get your private data. Right? So nowhere does this algorithm here protect against this. In some ways, as computer engineers, we have to recognize that a lot of these algorithms are developed by cryptographers. They have these sort of so-called threat models here, but most of them do not understand or assume that the hardware does what it does faithfully and secretly. And side channel attacks means don't trust that. The hardware may not be as secret in doing it as you think it is. And there's another form of attack, not quite what I would call side channels, called fault injection attacks, which means someone could inject faults into the processing in various forms. A laser on top of a chip could heat a portion of a chip up to the point where it starts producing errors. If they can create noise on the power supply of the chip, that can produce errors. If they get a hold of the GDS2 as the chip was being produced, they could put in Trojans that could be activated to produce errors. And you need to think about all these various forms. So hardware security, the security of the hardware is essential. It's the foundation to get any of these so-called benefits in terms of privacy realized. If your hardware is not secure, then nothing you do on top of it is secure. So this just goes to show that people need to think about these issues on a full stack point of view. You need to understand them at an algorithmic level. You need to understand what the algorithm is assuming, and then you need to make sure that the hardware can adhere to those assumptions. Does that, you think, answer your question, eh?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very clarifying here. Well,
yeah. So it's really important that the people who are doing hardware security, there's a huge role, and a lot of the attacks and things that people are looking at. There's something called the bit flip attack. I think you may know of this row hammer attack. People are worried about a bit flip attack on a machine learning model. And what they showed is that they may only be able to flip 10 bits of a machine learning model, and now the machine learning model doesn't work. How do you protect against that? Maybe there's ways to build a model that's more protective against bit flip attacks. So there's another example of where a hardware attack that we normally just understood as a hardware attack, when you think about it in the context of machine learning, becomes more touchable, tangible, and then now we need to think about, well, how can we fight that attack in the context of machine learning?
Okay, yeah. Right. So we still don't have questions. I have time for if I have time for one more question concerning the last set of techniques where you compared
Spiky neural networks.
the approach of using ANNs and SNNs. How do you find a security comparisons of these two approaches of modeling? Artificial neural networks are easier or harder to attack than a spiky neural network, in your opinion?
That's a great question, Nate. But I don't think people know. I think both are vulnerable, is what I would say. Both are vulnerable, and I think the other aspects it may end up being dependent on the model more than just whether it's spiking or whether it's artificial neural networks. And it also may depend on the specific hardware that we're running on when we think about that. I don't think, in my view, one has an inherent advantage over another, is what I would probably say right now. My students may disagree with me, but I think that it's something to think about. It's something that, because people are still fighting to make sure that SNNs are valuable, are low power, they can be accelerated properly. There's not been as much attention on attacking them. But from what I've seen, a lot of them mirror the behavior of an artificial neural network, but try to do it in a more computational efficient manner. It makes me think that they're going to be similarly vulnerable.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
We don't have questions, so I think we can maybe stop from here, Ricardo.